The debate over the creative merits of eating in front of the camera may have some artistic purists reaching for the antacid. But what isn't in doubt is that food has long had a seat at the artistic table, and that history helps explain why audiences have such an insatiable appetite for cuisine playing a prominent role in art.
Humans have been depicting food in art for approximately 40,000 years. From prehistoric cave paintings that show the animals they hunted, to drawings on pyramid walls that showed pharaohs being served food. There was presumably no confusion over what they wanted to eat in the afterlife. There was this famous gathering around the dinner table. Leonardo da Vinci painted The Last Supper in a Milan convent. A few decades later, in the same city, Giuseppe Arcimboldo began to develop his feasts for the eyes. Eating has commonly been featured as a performance art, especially when it's inedible objects that are being consumed. Over the past 65 years, food art has undergone dramatic changes.
Starting in about 1950, food became something artificial. It was produced industrially and stored in cans. This is the era of pop art, where food becomes the subject of sculptures and paintings, and to this day that subject has evolved into an icon of the future.
Mass consumption is a frequent subject. As is the globalization of food and rapidly changing eating habits. And apparently, Da Vinci's Last Supper wasn't the last one after all.
For more on food's relationship with the arts, we're joined by Dr. Diana Ye. She's a lecturer in sociology, culture and the creative industries at City University of London. Dr. Ye, food has long played a prominent role in art. Why are artists so drawn to what we eat?
Yes, you're right. Food has played such an important role in art throughout the ages, right from the beginning of early depictions of hunting and survival in ancient cave paintings up until today. So, I think food is such a fundamental part of our existence, of who we are, and is central to so many different aspects of our lives, and of course is so highly symbolic. So, we eat for sustenance, but we also eat for pleasure. And food, or the lack of it, provokes powerful feelings, hunger, satiation, but also desire and disgust. So it's also a deeply social act, intimately bound up with our issues of identity, our sense of who we are, and it also connects us to sort of memories of our past, possibly through generations of families, but also connects us to others in the present, or in fact also can disconnect us from others in the present.
Is it fair to say that food is a medium for artists to explain their feelings?
Well, I don't think it's so much about explaining feelings. I really think that the power of food as a medium is precisely because it works at a level below rational explanation. Our primal relationship to food means that it allows artists to communicate with us at a much deeper level about things that are very difficult to actually put into words. So I think it's very much about actually provoking feelings in the audiences and engaging them in a much more powerful way. So I'd like to give you an example, if I can. This is a work called Transfiguration by the performance artist Mad for Real. So they're two artists who shot to fame for their work Jumping on Tracy Emin's Bed in 1999. But unlike that work, Transfiguration was a very low-key and sober performance. And it basically consisted of the two artists standing in front of a table with, filled with tomatoes and a liquidizer. And they slowly fed in the tomatoes into the liquidizer, poured the liquid tomatoes into cups and handed them out to audience members. Now, the fact that they did so against the backdrop of a container lorry meant that it highlighted this work as a kind of an act of commemoration to what we now know as the Dover 58 tragedy. So that was a tragedy in which 58 young Chinese people from China were found suffocated to death in a container lorry trying to enter Britain without the necessary papers. And as a result, by drinking the tomato juice, it was though the audience members were taking part in a kind of a modern day communion in which they were taking in the lifeblood of the would-be migrants, those who actually lost their lives. And in that way, they were implicated very much within the modern day global practices of consumption that actually depend on a migrant workforce. And you know, it's very, the would-be migrants were actually transfigured through that process, as the title of the work suggests. Their souls now alive in the bodies of the audiences. So in that way, you know, I think food allows artists to really compel the audience to be engaged in a highly intimate and embodied way.
So what can you say about artists' relationship with food today?
Well, I think it's really interesting because obviously it's changed radically over the centuries. And I think what's interesting now at the moment is that at a time when, you know, galleries, supermarkets, advertising, everyone seems to be bombarding us, our senses all the time, trying to compete for our attention. What's interesting about contemporary artists is the way that they use food in a much more sort of considered manner. So the use of food in contemporary art, I think, is not so much about its sensory effects. It really doesn't just end there. Rather, it's about the power of food to be able to provoke intense feelings that is used by artists to explore the contemporary world. So, you know, we might think about Immanuel Kant, the philosopher during the Enlightenment era, who really thought about aesthetics as a kind of form of pure disinterested pleasure. But I think artists today, that doesn't really apply, and they're really thinking about a much more form of aesthetics that is inherently ethical and political too.
For you, what's the most interesting way an artist has incorporated food into their work?
Well, I suppose I'd just like to mention a couple of my favourites in terms of the kind of artists who deal in the area of food, but in which food itself is actually absent. So both pieces that I'm referring to here are beautifully economical pieces which use instead kitchen utensils to unravel a range of contemporary concerns about migration, labour and belonging. So the first one is by the artist Anthony Key, who I really must mention here as being the first artist who really introduced me to my interest in food and art. And he's an artist whose entire oeuvre has been based around food, and as a means of kind of working through his place in the world. And one of the works I'd like to mention is Wok Satellite, in which he essentially uses, you know, the kitchen utensil that is used in Chinese cooking and positions it also as a satellite.
Dr. Diane Eo, thank you very much for joining us.